Hugh Edwards, the face of the BBC, is the presenter at the centre of the crisis engulfing the corporation. And tonight, he is in hospital receiving treatment. He has spoken of his struggles with depression before. Police say there was no criminality involved in the case. One of his closest colleagues of the past 30 years, John Sopel, spoke to us.
It seems that what we're left with is nothing in terms of anything criminal. And so therefore you're left asking yourself, what was this all about?
So what happens next for Hugh Edwards, the BBC, and for the Sun newspaper? Also in News at 10 tonight. Smoothing ruffled diplomatic feathers at NATO. All smiles tonight. But after President Zelensky's strong words demanding more help for Ukraine, London and Washington hint that a little gratitude for help already given would be welcome. On the brink of one of the worst public sector disputes, doctors go on strike again tomorrow in the longest industrial action in NHS history, and others will follow suit. How can the government fix this whilst also balancing the books? Flooding, environmental damage and hemorrhaging money, Thames Water's disastrous problems pile up. The woman who used to regulate the company but is now its boss faced MPs today as gamekeeper turned poacher with a bad track record as both.
Asking for an apology from you, Ms. Ross.
No, I won't apologise for my role
Don't
as
want to
chief
apologise.
executive of what, no.
And she may be 65 years old, but Hollywood is giving Barbie a very modern update as a new summer blockbuster opens in London. But don't worry, it is as pink as ever.
This is ITV News at 10. With Rageh Omaar.
Good evening. After days of speculation and online rumours that newsreader Hugh Edwards, the figurehead of BBC News and the face of the corporation at the most important national and ceremonial occasions, was the suspended presenter, it was his own wife who confirmed it this evening. She said she was doing so on his behalf out of concern for his mental well-being and to protect the couple's children. She pointed to his well-documented depression and said the events of the last few difficult days had led him to needing inpatient hospital care. Another important revelation came from the police, who issued a statement saying that their investigation had revealed that no crime had been committed in the allegations printed by the Sun newspapers.
Tonight at 10, chaos and uncertainty in prospect.
He spent decades fronting BBC News. Tonight, he became the story. Hugh Edwards, named as the presenter, accused of criminal offences. After days of fervent speculation, it came just as his colleagues went on air with the BBC News at 6. A difficult script to deliver.
Good evening. Well, in the last few minutes, the BBC presenter has been named as Hugh Edwards, the man who...
Confirmation came from his wife with this statement. Hugh is suffering from serious mental health issues. As is well documented, he has been treated for severe depression in recent years. The events of the last few days have greatly worsened matters. He has suffered another serious episode and is now receiving inpatient hospital care where he'll stay for the foreseeable future. Once well enough to do so, he intends to respond to the stories that have been published. The first and most serious allegations appeared in The Sun last week. Claims he paid a teenager for sexually explicit photos. The police began looking for evidence and this evening said detectives from the Met's Specialist Crime Command have now concluded their assessment and have determined there is no information to indicate that a criminal offence has been committed. Yesterday, BBC News reported claims he sent threatening messages to a person he met online, and the front page of The Sun today claims he broke lockdown rules. On these allegations, police say there's no further action at this time.
So here we are. We are just seconds away from the result of the exit poll.
Hugh Edwards has been the public face of BBC News for moments in history. General elections.
Look at this. It's a pretty wonderful view.
Royal weddings.
This is BBC News from London.
even announcing the death of the Queen last year.
Of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth.
Earlier, a fellow presenter was calling for him to reveal his identity.
He needs to come forward now.
Now we know more about his fragile mental health. It's up to the BBC to find out if any wrongdoing has taken place. The Sun newspaper says it will cooperate. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
Well, the Sun newspaper's statement this evening tried to head off criticism of how it first reported the allegations against Hugh Edwards. It said it had never mentioned criminality. Other media outlets did, that it said, including the BBC, which may leave the corporation with its own questions to answer. Its Director General said the BBC's own investigation would now restart, but navigating with care and consideration.
After 5 days of front pages about the BBC, there'll be no new revelations from The Sun. Following all the paper's stories about a famous newsreader, now the judgment of their journalists is also under scrutiny.
I thought it interesting that the denial that was issued by the young person involved in the first story wasn't given perhaps the weight that some of us think that it might have been given by The Sun on the, as the days progressed.
There are difficult days ahead for Hugh Edwards' employer too. Police say he's done nothing criminal, so how does the BBC adjudicate on the moral and decide when a private life is any business of a public broadcaster?
The difficulty is that if somebody's a presenter on television, they're an integral part of the story. When they present, their facial expressions, everything go into the story. People learn to trust them as a person. Once details come out about their private life, if it's controversial or difficult or unpleasant or tawdry in any way, that is in people's minds when they see the presenter.
Scotland prepares to greet the new king.
So what about the reign of TV royalty? Is this the end for a presenter who's been a national fixture?
We now know there was no illegality. So what are you left with? Someone's private life has come under scrutiny, who is now unwell. I think it would be a crying shame if this is the last we see of Hugh Edwards on television, when the allegations have turned out to be not that much. And I think all his friends will just be wishing him well at this stage, because Hugh commands huge respect in this industry.
Tonight, the man who's reported on so many difficult stories remains in hospital, focusing on the complexities of his own life.
Well, Rebecca and Paul join me now. Rebecca, you've been following the story over the last 5 days as it's unfolded with all of its complexities. So where are we, do you think, we are at tonight?
Well, over the last few days, enormous pressure clearly has been mounting on Hugh Edwards and the BBC. Let's not forget that these allegations were incredibly serious, criminal allegations, claims that he paid for sexually explicit images from someone under the age of 18. We now know there's no evidence of any criminal offence. The police are taking no further action. So in my view, the attention, the pressure quite rapidly shifts onto the Sun newspaper and their editorial decisions. Yes, they didn't name him, but that didn't stop the frenzied speculation and the rumours. Now, the BBC, as it said in an email to its staff tonight, has the task of navigating a very complex set of circumstances with care and consideration. It must balance its duty of care to its employee, who's now in hospital suffering from mental health issues, with its duty to investigate any potential wrongdoing by a publicly funded, high-profile presenter.
Thanks, Rebecca. And Paul, it does leave this awkward position at the moment whereby the police investigation has said that no criminality was committed, as Rebecca was saying, but the BBC is still clutching on to this idea that it's going to restart its investigation. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, and I think Rebecca's right that the shape of that investigation, the context and the background to that investigation is radically different to the shape of the investigation that was taking place at 6 o'clock this evening before the news broke about Hugh Edwards. And the difficulty now for the BBC is that it's got to navigate the mental health of Hugh Edwards, the duty of care, the extra duty of care that it's got to Hugh Edwards. And while his wife doesn't specifically link his mental health to this alleged behaviour in her statement today, it's clear that the context here is that a presenter was having a mental health crisis, and that may explain why one of the best paid, best known stars on the BBC would start contacting strangers online. And I think the difficulty for the BBC now is where to draw that line between interfering essentially in a presenter's private life, and what's extra difficult is that the BBC's viewers and licence fee payers will have their own view on where that line should be drawn.
Very quickly though, problems for the Sun as well, surely?
Yeah, as Rebecca said, I think there are huge questions tonight about the journalism of the Sun newspaper, their decision to go ahead and print this story despite the fact they'd had a denial from the young person involved in the initial scoop.
OK, Rebecca and Paul, both, thank you very much indeed. Now, there's probably never a good time to set out challenging choices on public sector pay rises, but least of all, perhaps, on the eve of the longest strike in the history of junior doctors in England. Tonight, the Chancellor told Roberts he will not borrow money to fund increases. Well, that means if, and it's a big if, recommended rises of around 6% are to be honoured, the money will have to come from existing budgets. And that can only mean one thing: savings from hospitals, schools and other public services.
There were walkouts in the winter, strikes through the spring, and stoppages in the summer. They've been going on so long that the pay they went on strike over is about to be reviewed again. But today the Chancellor told Robert Peston that borrowing to fund new pay rises would only stoke inflation.
If you fund any public sector pay rise by increasing borrowing that year, that pumps billions of pounds of extra money into the economy, and when companies can't meet the demand, when people try and spend that money, they react by putting up their prices. We won't fund any public sector pay awards through additional borrowing.
Independent pay review bodies are understood to have recommended public sector pay rises of around 6%, and they will be hard to ignore because when they made lower recommendations last year, ministers went round saying things like this.
The pay review bodies are the right way to balance the affordability to your viewers.
We're going through the independent pay review bodies.
How do we do pay in the public sector? We take the recommendations of independent pay bodies.
Of course, the strikes over the current offers are still going on. Tomorrow, junior doctors in England will walk out for 5 days, their longest strike yet. A rare 2-day stoppage by hospital consultants in England will follow, before radiographers also stage a 2-day walkout. NHS England says 15,000 treatments a day could be disrupted. Junior doctors say the NHS is already in trouble.
Sadly, these extreme level of pressures are nothing new for the NHS these days, because for years the government have failed to adequately workforce plan for the NHS.
Would it be right to fund anyone's pay rise in the NHS from the existing budget?
No, I don't think it's right that the money should be asked to come from existing budgets. We are a wealthy country. We can well afford to adequately pay our healthcare staff.
Today, teachers from the NASUWT also voted for further strike action in the new school year. The Prime Minister, returning from the NATO summit, is expected to sit down with the Chancellor in the coming days to hammer out what pay rises to offer and how on earth they can be funded. Carl Dinnan, News at 10.
Well, if mortgage payers think their monthly repayments are unmanageable now, there is worse pain to come. And that bad news was delivered from the Bank of England today, which said 1 million households will be forking out an extra eye-watering £500 a month in 3 years' time. Shihab is here to take us through these pretty startling figures.
Okay, it's a cost of living crisis that seems to get worse and worse, almost month on month, impacting people's budgets all over the country. And things aren't expected to get better anytime soon if you have a mortgage. The Bank of England is warning that by the end of 2026, nearly 1 million of us will be paying at least £500 per month extra on our mortgage costs. And I'm afraid the news doesn't get any better in the short term either. Those expecting to renew their mortgage deal later this year can expect to pay an average £220 more per month based on current rates. And you can see just how stark the problem is on this graph. It shows that the average rate on a 2-year fixed deal is now at 6.7%. That's higher than after Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget last year, and the highest since the financial crisis in 2008. I suspect it won't bring any comfort to learn that all of us paying more on our mortgages are actually doing so because of an entirely deliberate tactic from the Bank of England. But the question is, why? The answer? Inflation. It currently stands at 8.7%, much higher than other comparable countries and well above the government's target of 2%. To deal with that, since the end of 2021, the Bank of England has been raising interest rates to encourage us to save more and spend less. So, can the banks cope? Well, today, the Bank of England's governor said the banking sector is strong and that it can protect us more. It can protect more of us from financial woe.
The UK economy and financial system have so far been resilient to interest rate risk. Compared to previous periods of high interest rates, households and businesses are less likely to cut back on spending and default on loans. The banks have options to offer support to their customers. A more resilient banking system has more options in that sense to support its customers.
But regardless of that attempt to try and ease concerns, there will be many up and down the country, Rageh, who are incredibly concerned as they continue to feel the pinch.
I'm sure they will. Thank you very much indeed, Shihab. And Robert joins me now from his studio in West London. Now, Robert, you sat down with the Chancellor today in an exclusive interview. What did he tell you about tackling these two massive problems of inflation on the one hand and the public sector pay issue on the other?
Well, his broad message was he is not going to change direction. He is counting on the Bank of England to put up interest rates as necessary to bear down on inflation, and he still remains optimistic that that will not cause excessive pain and will succeed in bringing inflation down. One of the things he said to me was, he cited actually Bank of England's expectation that inflation would be 3% in about a year's time. I mean, it's an awfully long time away. And I have to say, the important point about that 3% is, well, it's still above the target of 2%. But America, which had pretty much exactly the same inflationary problems as us, announced 3% inflation today. There is a very British problem, and it's to do, some of it's to do with Brexit, some of it's to do with having big shortages of workers in the economy. All of this, to an extent, the government is ignoring. They're putting all their eggs into this basket of raising interest rates. As I said on the news just last night, some economists are seeing interest rates going, that's the bank rate, going all the way up to 7%, which would mean mortgages going higher for two-year deals than 7%. So there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unease for British people, completely understandable. And if you want to know more about the government's plans, tune in a few minutes, because that full interview is on my programme.
OK, Robert, we will tune in. And as Robert was just saying, you can see his interview with the Chancellor straight after the news. Now, for a meeting all about international diplomacy, it might have seemed rather undiplomatic language. Echoing overnight comments from the White House, our Defence Secretary Ben Wallace implied Ukraine should be a bit more grateful for Western help. The West is not an Amazon delivery service for weapons, was the gist of it. His boss, the Prime Minister, smoothed that over, saying Ukraine had been grateful. And President Zelensky left the summit with promises, if not of a timetable to NATO membership, at least of closer security ties.
It became clear yesterday that President Zelensky of Ukraine had come to this summit with rather different expectations about what he was going to be offered. He'd called words in the summit communiqué absurd and said it lacked respect for the sacrifices they were making. The leaders themselves, particularly President Biden, had politely sidestepped his remarks, but his officials late last night had used the word ungrateful, given that US taxpayers have committed more than $80 billion to Ukraine. And this morning, in an illustration it wasn't just the Americans, Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, in an unusual on-the-record chat with reporters, went much further. He said that whether we like it or not, people did want to hear gratitude. And he then told a story about how he was once driven for 11 hours through Ukraine to a meeting at which he was presented with a long wish list. He says he told them, "I am not Amazon." Zelensky, when asked, re-emphasised how grateful he was. and addressing his own defence minister, told him to get on the phone to Wallace.
Do you have problems with your relationship with the Minister of UK? So why don't you extend words of gratitude to him?
That's great. And you have to call him. Yep. Please, today.
At his end of summit press conference, the Prime Minister swiftly distanced himself from his Defence Secretary.
President Zelensky has repeatedly expressed his gratitude to me and to the British people, and indeed other allies as well. He did it very movingly in Parliament when he was in the UK earlier this year. He continues to be grateful for our support and our leadership and the welcome that we've extended to many Ukrainian families.
Sunak and Zelensky had met earlier, Sunak asking all officials to leave.
Actually, you guys do it, shall we? Should we just spend some time alone? Yeah.
Leaving them to talk about the security guarantees that Britain, the US and others will be offering until the moment that Ukraine finally joins the alliance. And the mood today, as Zelensky sat at the top table as an equal, was very much that even though there will be no formal invitation issued here, Ukraine's NATO future is a matter of when, not if.
We're going to help Ukraine build a strong, capable defense across land, air, and sea, from which will be a force of stability in the region and deter against any and all threats.
Ukrainian delegation is bringing home significant security victory for the Ukraine, for our country, for our people, for our children. It opens for us absolutely new security opportunities, and I thank everyone who made it possible. Thank you, dear colleagues.
With 32 allies here trying to incorporate a single nation, fighting for its very existence, there were bound to be tensions. It's been a bumpy summit, but Zelensky returns to Kiev without everything he wanted, but with much more than when he arrived. James Mace, News at 10, Vilnius, Lithuania.
Home and in the depths of deepest grief when a loved one has died from a medical mistake. Perhaps the least a bereaved relative could expect is the truth. Today, the North East Ambulance Service said sorry to families for covering up errors and holding back information from coroners. The families believed it was all deliberate, but a review published today said it couldn't explain why the mistakes happened. The families called that a whitewash. Now, it may have escaped your notice, but the woman currently running Thames Water was once head of the industry's regulator. Gamekeeper turned poacher, some might say. Catherine Ross ran Ofwat. At the time, Thames Water was taken over by the Australian investment company, which then saddled it with billions of pounds of debt. Her switch had not escaped the notice of MPs when she appeared in front of them today. When asked about that time, Ms Ross told them, "I won't apologise for my role at Ofwat, no."
Thames Water leaks the equivalent of 250 Olympic swimming pools every day. Some of that water surfaced in South London this morning, where it forced a school to close.
We have a huge company in Thames Water who get paid a lot of money to make sure that the water infrastructure works. And yet, here we are today. We have to close the school because we've got no running water.
Another frustrated customer, then, of a company which needs to spend money on its pipes. And in front of MPs this morning, a boss with bad news about where that money will have to come from.
That will need to be funded, and it is an unfortunate truth that the only source of ultimate funding for that in the current model is the customer.
Privatisation a generation ago was supposed to build a bigger and better water industry by giving water companies the chance to run their own books, using profits to invest. Well, part of that plan worked well. Thames Water has made plenty of profit and yet still finds itself somehow short of cash.
Since 2006, Thames Water's debt has grown from £3.2 billion to more than £14 billion last year. In that same period, it's paid out enormous dividends to shareholders. 656 million in 2007 and 37 million last year.
These companies mortgaged the assets, were lent money against the assets, which they paid out in dividends, rather than using the money from borrowing against the assets purely for investment. The fact that it was allowed to happen is one of the worst examples of regulatory failure that we've witnessed.
And who used to be in charge of the water industry's regulator? Well, none other than the boss of Thames Water.
Would you like to apologise to the taxpayer for being here and potentially putting them in this position where yet again another regulated market could potentially collapse and expose taxpayers to billions of pounds?
I think if you're asking for an apology from Ofwat, I think you should...
Asking for an apology from you, Ms Ross?
No, I won't apologise for my role as the Chief Executive as Ofwat, no.
Okay.
Ms Ross assured MPs that the company wasn't going to go bankrupt, which means there is at least a plan to fix the leaks, which might reassure Thames Water customers who were reliant on bottled water after a leak last night and who will end up having to pay for the repairs. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
Tennis, and the surprises keep on coming at this summer's Wimbledon. Today, the defending champion, Elena Rybakina, went out in the women's quarterfinals. She was beaten by Ons Jabeur in 3 sets. Revenge of sorts for Jabeur, the number 6 seed who lost in last year's final. No such problems for the men's top seed Carlos Alcaraz, but after his 3-set victory over childhood friend Holger Rune to reach his Wimbledon semi-final, he was asked whether his father had been videoing one of Novak Djokovic's training sessions. He said it was probably true. The dream of England winning back the women's Ashes is alive and well after an exciting victory in today's one-day international. England were set a target of 264 and thanks to an impressive innings from captain Heather Knight, they reached it with 2 wickets and 11 balls to spare. She was 75 not out. The series is now level with 2 more one-day games to go. Very exciting. Now, as movies go, they couldn't be much more different. Barbie is the fantasy tale of life inside and outside Barbieland. Oppenheimer is a thriller based on the father of the atomic bomb. But they do have something in common. They are both blockbuster films of the summer, which cinemas are hoping will boost audiences to pre-COVID levels. To kick things off, Barbie had its premiere tonight, complete with pink carpet, not red.
A premiere plastered in pink. You'd expect no less for a movie jam-packed with A-listers, bringing the iconic Barbie to life. And just 20 metres away, its competition for big screen summer success prepares for its own red carpet. Christopher Nolan's 3-hour-long Oppenheimer is a far cry from the choreographed numbers of Barbie.
Hi, Barbie. Hi, Ken.
But both movies are coming out on the same day, July 21st. Film studios try and avoid that because they compete for audiences, but stars think it shows that cinema is thriving and people crave a few hours at the pictures.
I mean, I don't think anything compares to a cinema experience, and this movie in particular, it's just so fun with a group. It's like a giant dance party. You want to be with your friends for it.
I think that this is a summer that is proving that people still want to go out and see big stories on the big screen.
There was something that was so viscerally satisfying about it being extremely hot and then going into a dark, cold movie theater and being transported. And I think I wanted to create that kind of experience for viewers.
Barbie and Oppenheimer, or as their joint release has now become known, Barbenheimer, come hot on the heels of other 2023 blockbusters like Mission Impossible and Indiana Jones.
Get back! With the cinema closures that came with the pandemic and the subsequent surge in streaming, many wondered if cinema admissions would ever return to previous levels. Last year, movies bounced back. Avatar: The Way of Water made more than £1.8 billion at the box office, while Top Gun: Maverick also made more than £1 billion. One study found that in 2019, there were 7.9 billion cinema admissions globally, but it could take until 2027 to get close to that number once again.
For independent cinema owners, a stream of Hollywood hits helps boost business.
I do think that the habits are now being formed again. Where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 releases back to back, it definitely creates that let's go to the cinema every week, and that's what we need. So yeah, we're feeling a lot more confident that things are getting there. We're not out of the woods. We need everyone's support, but yeah, it definitely seems to be going the right way.
Why? Whether it's the story of the first atomic bomb you want to see, or the ups and downs of Ken and Barbie, this summer's got fans flocking to the cinema once again. Rishi Davda, News at 10.
Well, finally, a birthday card from space, and this is the stunning image released by the American space agency NASA on the first anniversary of the James Webb Telescope starting its work. This one shows how stars are born. It's a colourful, chaotic tapestry, swirling gas studded with young stars, and it's just 390 light years away. And that's it from me for tonight. From all of us, good night.